Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining me yet again for week 11 of the ConsoliDator MasterClass. Can you believe it's already been 11 weeks? So just a few things to take care of before we get started. I sent out, with the invite to this session, I sent out a final exam for everyone, and it's also going to be included on the email that gets sent out after this presentation. So if you could get that done by Monday or sometime next week, that would be fantastic. Also, this is actually going to be our last official class when we're going to learn things and go over some materials I've prepared. We will still be meeting next week one last time, so this is going to be our last official class. So afterwards, if you could please stick around for a few minutes and answer a couple questions I have on the survey, that would be invaluable to me. I'm not sure if we're going to do a class like this again in the future, but I'd like to know your overall thoughts and see if you took value out of this class so that we can do something similar in the future. And so, that said, we're going to go ahead and move on. And so today, what we're going to learn about is some advanced math functions and not so advanced math functions. And we're also going to take a look at a few other features that didn't really have a home in any of the other sessions. So I went ahead and added them to this one. One of them is called SelectA or B. The other one's text, percent, and the last one is capture. That probably doesn't mean anything to any of you right now, so we're going to dive in and we'll get to those. So I've mentioned to you plenty of times before that the ConsoliDator Plus can do all sorts of math calculations and math functions. And so basically, if you can do the calculation on a calculator, the ConsoliDator Plus can do it. And so the first one we're going to take a look at is pretty basic, just basic addition. And so you can create any channel, and if you go into, you make the function, you open up that box there, and you go into the math category, you're going to see a list of all sorts of different math functions that the device is capable of doing. So one of them is addition. And so what this type of channel allows you to do is to add channels together, or the value of the channels together. And you can add as many as you want, and you can even add a constant. So let's say, for example, you always want to add the number 4 to every single measurement. Well, you can do that with the constant that we have here. But obviously, the default is 0. And so what's the point of doing this? Well, let's say you have 5 tanks. They're all connected, but they all have their own level sensors on them. And so you want to know what your overall volume is. You don't care what any one individual tank is holding. Well, you would put all of those tanks onto this screen and add them together. You can take another math function, like let's say you divided a couple values. You can use the answer from a math channel in a math channel, if that makes sense. And the last thing I want to mention here is that the units of each channel that you're going to add together must agree. That makes sense, right? You can't really add gallons and liters without doing some sort of conversion. And although the consolidator can do unit conversions for you, it's not going to in a simple math function like this. So what about some other math functions we can do? Well, the next one I decided to go over was division. I use the division function actually quite frequently in a lot of the applications I do. For example, last week when I showed you the time to fill, where it was showing you how long it's going to take to fill the tank, I actually used division to calculate that. So it is very, very useful. So a couple things I do want to point out about this, of course, is the fact that we're only going to be dividing 2 values at a time. And pay close attention to the order of operations. So it's A divided by B. So you just want to make sure that you're actually dividing the right numbers together, because it's whatever your value A is, we're dividing whatever your value B is going to be, not the other way around. And again, just like with addition or any math function, really, the units of each channel that you're multiplying, adding, or dividing together have to agree. In this particular example, my units are none, so that agrees, right? And so we can do all sorts of basic arithmetic. I'm not going to go through every single thing and show you, but you can take a look here and see all the different math functions that we can do with the consolidator. And like I mentioned, we can do addition, subtraction. We can also do this thing called absolute difference. We can find the absolute value. We can do averaging, weighted averages, all sorts of stuff. And that's just for the basic arithmetic. And we're going to get into a few of those in a second here. Now, for more advanced math functions, now this one's pretty wild. The Consolidator Plus can actually handle trigonometry or trigonomic functions. And so basically, to be totally honest with you, if you can think of a reason that you would need to use trigonometry in our industry, that would be extremely valuable for me to know. The reason why this feature made it onto the product was simply because if you can do it on a calculator, we want to be able to do it on here. And so we added these trig functions. So you can take whatever your input is, and you can multiply that times the sine of whatever degrees you want, or the cosine of whichever degrees you want. And we can also choose between degrees or radians. That might not mean anything to anybody here. It's just a different form of measurement, kind of. And so we could do all sorts of different trig functions: sine, cosine, tangent, arcsine, arccosine, arctangent, and a whole lot more. And so again, I'm not entirely sure the exact usage for this math function, but I figured it's at least good for everyone to know that it's there. So, and again, if you can tell me why you would want to use trig in our industry, please do let me know. There'll be some extra credit for you there. The next math function I want to take a look at is averaging. And so you saw me do this when we talked about the pressure applications. This is a long time ago, and where I had 3 pressure measurements, and I was only reading out the average PSI that they were showing. And so this is how I did it. Again, for the function of the channel, I went to math and then picked average. And so basically all this does is allows you to add multiple channels and average those values together. And again, you do want to make sure that your units do match. And it looks like someone has their hand raised. If you want to just go ahead and type into the chat, I'm going to get to those, any questions as we go. So the one thing I want to mention about this averaging function is the fact that when you use each item or each channel you have on that list is going to contribute to the average evenly. So, for example, if you only had 2 items that you were looking to average, each of those items is going to contribute 50% to the average. And if you had 4 items like I do on this screen, they're each going to contribute 25% to the average. However, what if we don't want to do that? Let's just say, for example, that you have 2 level sensors that you're measuring your tank with. One of them is a radar level, and the other one's an ultrasonic transmit. And for whatever reason, you trust one more than the other. For whatever reason, you trust your radar level more than you do your ultrasonic sensor. But you still want to get an average of the reading. But we want to put a lot more faith into the radar than we do the ultrasonic. Well, that's when we would use this function, which is averaging, in parentheses, weighted, or weighted average. And so what that allows you to do is just find the average, but you get to pick which object gets a certain amount of weight. Now, you do want to make sure that when you do finish this, that your total weight does equal 100. So you definitely want to do that, because otherwise you're not going to get an accurate reading. And so hopefully that makes sense. There's nothing too tricky about this. Like I said, we're not going to spend too much time on it. These are just things that are good to know, because if there's ever a question that a customer has that says, well, geez, it'd be great if you could do this, but we need to be able to do this crazy math, well, we can do that with it. So just know that it's available and that the math functions are useful. The last math sort of function that we're going to get into is absolute value. And so for anyone that doesn't know what absolute value means, the book definition of absolute value is how far away a number is from zero. So it doesn't necessarily mean the value. It means if you were to look on a number line, instead of thinking about a number in terms of quantity, if you thought about it in terms of distance, so -2 is 2 units away from 0. +2 is 2 units away from 0. So in absolute value, -2 and 2 are actually the exact same value. And so what happens when we choose this function on the consolidator is it takes whatever the value of your channel is and makes it a positive number. So let's just say, for example, you subtracted 2 numbers, except you subtracted a larger number from a smaller number. So your answer is going to be a negative value. Well, we could always take that and put it into an absolute value channel, and now no matter what, the answer is always going to be a positive value. So we can do the same thing with difference as well. There is an absolute difference, and so all it does is save us a step. So that means you can subtract 2 numbers. Your answer is always going to be positive regardless of what happens. Let's see. I have a couple questions coming in. I'm going to get to them in a little bit, just because I have a couple really interesting things coming up here. So that's about it for math, for the math function. Now, as I mentioned, they are useful. There are things you can use them for. I use them all the time when I'm taking in requests from the field. When people ask if the consolidator can do X, Y, and Z, I'm constantly using math functions. So they are helpful. But we're going to move on to something else. We're going to move on to the other category. And so the rest of the slides don't have to do with math, of course, but they are extremely valuable because they really expand on the capability of the consolidator. And so, for example, I sent this video to a few of the folks in this class, but I can actually have the consolidator tell your customer to call you if something goes wrong. So that's pretty cool, right? I can literally have it say, call, and then your number. We have just enough characters to fit that on there. So I'm going to show you exactly how we do that in a second. So the first other feature we're going to take a look at is in the Consolidator Plus. It's called SelectA or B. So here is what it does. Here's the problem. You have a customer who monitors the level of their wet well with 2 separate technologies. They use ultrasonic and they use a submersible pressure transducer. Their primary sensor is the submersible transducer, and the other is an ultrasonic sensor that's suspended from the top. However, sometimes the submersible transducer just the wires get cut, it stops working, we get bad signals or something, okay? So when that submersible transducer stops working for some reason, we don't want to rely on that for our level reading. We want to switch over to the ultrasonic sensor. And so that's exactly what the Consolidator Plus can be set up to do. So again, just to go over it, you have 2 level readings. The Consolidator Plus is only going to be accepting 1 at a time, but you can tell it when to choose which input to actually use. So to do this, it's actually going to take a few different objects. It's going to be, about 4 or 5 different objects. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is we need to know one thing. We need to know when our transmitter drops out, or our submersible transducer. We need to know when that drops out. So the first thing I would tell you to do is to set up your input, of course, and name it, of course. But after you do that, we want to know exactly when this thing is going to drop out. And so this break below, this is going to be very important for us. So the default setting for this is 0.01 milliamps, which is awfully low. And so it's low enough where if we kept that setting there, it's very possible our transmitter would actually be broken, but we wouldn't know because it's not reporting a break to the system. And so I usually tell folks, go ahead and check that box and make sure 4 milliamps is in there. so that we know as soon as that transmitter drops below 4 milliamps, it's going to report a break to the system. Okay, so that's step number one. Step number two is to create an alarm. And now this is going to get tricky. So we want this alarm to be true when our sensor is off. So the first thing we want to do is this break here, okay? I forget what the default setting is. I think it's stay as is, but you have three different options. You can either do alarm on, alarm off, or stay as is. Since we want this alarm to trigger when our sensor breaks, well, we want that setting to be alarm on. All right, so that's the first step. Now we have to tell the alarm, we have to give the alarm set points and reset points. But how are we going to do that? We don't have a value to give it. We just want to know when something is on or off. Well, we have to think in binary terms once again. So when our alarm is off, when our transducer is off, we want the alarm to trigger. So our set point is going to be 0, because 0 means that our sensor is off. We want this alarm to reset or go away when our sensor is back on, or when it's 1. So 0 is off, 1 is on. So hopefully that makes sense. I think I've gone over this type of alarming in the past. But so hopefully that makes sense. So we need the break alarm on, and we need our set point to be 0 and our reset to be 1. Okay? So then we have to create a channel that's actually called SelectA or B. So you find that function. It's in I think it's in the scale category. You make that the function. Now we want our input to this to be that alarm. And the reason why is because this channel that we're configuring here is the selection channel. This is where we tell the consolidator which inputs to choose. Okay? So when our sensor breaks or turns off, we trigger an alarm. So we want the input to this channel to be that alarm. When the alarm is on, that means our sensor is off. So when our alarm is on, we want to choose the ultrasonic transmitter as the input to our channel. When the alarm is off, that means our pressure transducer is back on and working. And so in that case, we want the consolidator plus to choose the pressure transmitter again to be our primary input. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it can be a little confusing and there's a lot going on here. But basically, we are setting it up so that when our sensor dies or breaks, that trips an alarm. When that alarm is active, we are telling the consolidator plus, hey, forget about the ultrasonic sensor for a second and forget about the pressure transmitter for a second and let's just use the ultrasonic sensor. Okay? Now, there's one last step to this, and it's actually pretty simple. I promise. The next step is to create your actual level channel. Okay? And we're going to set this up just like you would any other level channel, except the input to this channel is going to be that select A or B thing that we just did on the previous slide. So that channel is actually going to be the inputs to this level channel. Because then this level channel is going to either be based on the reading from the pressure transducer or the ultrasonic sensor. And then it doesn't matter what the value is, or it doesn't matter which sensor it is, you can still scale them both to read the same. So that is what the select A or B function is, and I think it's pretty clever because it actually has come up in the real world where people have asked us for this for this type of functionality. So let's see. I got a couple questions here. One of them is, why is there a decimal in the alarm set point if it is in? Okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to go back a couple slides for a second. You'll notice there is a decimal point here in the set point and the reset point. The only reason why it's there is because that's just the default. It's the same reason why my on delay and off delays over here have a decimal point. That's it. I'm not sure. That's sort of just the way it is. That's a great question, though. Someone asked if I can show the select A or B function on your actual demo so we can see how it performs. Yes. Might not be today because I don't have my demo set up to do that. But what I can do is I'll put a video together and send it to everyone. Yes, I can absolutely do that. Alrighty. So with that out of the way, we're on to our next feature. Hold on, let's see. Someone asked, what if the submersible transducer starts working again? To answer that question, so when the submersible transducer starts working again, it will actually be the input to the levels channel. So as you can see, this select A or B, what we are saying here is when our sensor is off, when our submersible transducer is off, take readings from the ultrasonic sensor. When the pressure transmitter comes back online, let's ignore the ultrasonic transducer and take readings from the pressure transmitter. I have another question that says, a few slides back, you stated to use this in a computation. How does ConsoliDator Plus recognize this feature in a calculation? Not entirely sure exactly what you mean by that. If you could clarify and write it in again, I'll try to address that. Okay, so moving on to our next feature here, we have what's called text and in parentheses %. So what the hell does this mean? So, well, let's read what the problem is. So the problem here is that the ConsoliDator Plus can express the level of a vessel in practically any engineering unit, but sometimes it would be best to also give operators some written instructions. And where I got the idea for this is actually I went on a sales call a couple weeks ago, and someone had one of our ProViews in the panel, and they had labels, like from a label maker, all over the enclosure, and it was instructions. And it would say, when the display is reading this, turn this valve or do this and do that. So it was giving operators instructions based on what the display was saying. And so I was like, well, wait a minute, the ConsoliDator Plus can do that. And so what I'm about to show you is how instead of scaling a 4 to 20 signal so that it displays numbers, we can have it display messages as well. And so what we do is we create a regular channel, and in the scale function, you'll see this text %. That's the function that we want there. And when you select that, this is what the screen looks like. So again, you're scaling a 4 to 20 milliamp signal, but instead of using numbers, we're using words, okay? And so the first thing we want to do is make sure that this checkbox is checked. It says use percentage from input bar graph. We want to use that. There's a reason why. We don't have to get into that, but you want to use that because we're basically scaling a 4 to 20. So we want to use that bar graph. And then what you do here is you click insert, and it's going to ask you to enter in a value and then a message. Okay, and so the first thing you enter in is, let's say 0, at 0%. So as you can see on my screen here, at 0%, I want the display to say totally empty. But when we get to 10%, I want it to say critical low level. And so what's going to happen while the tank is sitting, so as between 0% and 10%, it's going to show totally empty. okay? So these are sort of like ranges. So let's say I get to 50% capacity. Well, it's going to say level is okay until I get to 75%. So hopefully that makes sense. So it's within a range. We can have, I think, up to 100 messages. I think you could do one for each percentage point. I think that would be a little ridiculous, but you can do it. And so what you can actually do is show it on the screen, and you can also have this message here. If it's below 0%, we can have a different message. And then if we get a break on the transmitter, we can show a message. And so at the beginning of this portion of the slideshow, I actually showed you a screen where it had, call, and it had the main number for Precision Digital. This is where I did that. All I did was say that I turned this break on, and I just put the word call 508-655-7300. And so that means when the sensor to this channel, so when this ultrasonic sensor breaks or goes into a break condition, I'm going to have the ConsoliDator Plus display whatever the message is in here. And so if you want to be clever, you can have it be your number, and now all of a sudden customers are calling you. So let's see. So someone's saying below 0%, please explain. So basically, I'm not entirely sure why you would have the difference between a below 0 and a break. I would imagine, let's say, for example, you don't want to report a break to the system, but you also want to know when you're going below 4 milliamps on your input. That's when you would put below 0. So basically what that means is if you're getting anything below 4 milliamps, this is what it will read. But if your transmitter breaks altogether, this is what it will read. For this example, I made them both the same, but they can be different. Hopefully that clears it up for you. Now, if you're going to display this on a screen, which is the purpose of it, I would strongly suggest that we just go ahead and turn that bar graph off. The reason why is because I don't think there's really a need for it if you have these messages. If you also wanted to show the volumetric reading of your tank as well as these messages, you can do that. You would just create a regular, quote unquote, regular level channel. And so personally, I don't use the bar graph on a channel like this. I want the screen to just show these messages and that's it. Someone asked how many characters possible in text percent message. So, well, I have to count them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 15. You have 15 characters on the messages. And so we can also edit them as we go. So if you wanted to go ahead and change it, we can, if you wanted to change one of these settings, you can always edit these percentages and messages at any time. And that was it. Okay. And so somebody asked just now, how does this function look on the screen? And this is exactly how it looks. Someone also asked if you change the color at different percentages. I want to say the answer to that is yes, but I honestly haven't figured out how to do it yet. But yeah, I'm fairly certain you can. I just haven't sat down and figured it out yet. But you should be able to, yes. And so this is what it looks like on the screen, okay? And so this is why I said you can get rid of that bar graph, because otherwise you would have two bar graphs on this screen, and I just think it would look kind of silly. So if you want to, like, a good way to use this type of channel is to have, the volumetric reading on top, I think, and your tank status messages on the bottom. And so again, what's really cool here is you can actually we literally have just enough character space. Someone just asked about how many characters. We have just enough character space there to put a phone number. So that means that your customer is going to call you when the ConsoliDator Plus tells it, right? At least that's the hope, right? Alrighty, so we have one more feature to go over. and I only have 1 minute left, so I'm probably going to go over a few minutes here, so please forgive me. This one's going to be really quick, though, nothing too major. So this is what we call the capture feature. And so we've gone over the different function keys, or soft keys as I like to call them, and how they can perform meter functions. You can do it with a digital input. Last week we looked at scheduling, where you can schedule meter functions based on time and day. Well, this does this exact same thing, but it's based on process conditions. So let's say, for example, that you want to monitor, let's see, what did I write here? Yeah, so in this, let's just say, for example, when we get into an alarm state, we want the ConsoliDator Plus to jump to the screen that's triggering the alarm. So what we would want to do is we would want to take, I can't find my files. We would want to create a channel and use the control function and the control category in the function for and look for this capture thing. So capture is what we're looking for here. Now, there is an inputs and a units on this. You do not have to worry about those. Again, do not have to worry about this. All we're concerned with is the trigger and what to do on capture. So the first thing we do here is you choose what your trigger is. And so your trigger is going to be an object that you created, whether it's an alarm, a channel, some sort of output or object, something. So for this particular scenario, I went ahead and made it so that an alarm is my trigger. And so, and it's a sensor break alarm. And so what this is saying is when this alarm breaks, do something. But we haven't selected what to do yet. Right now it says do nothing. But if you look on the next screen, oh, there's the next screen. So on the on capture, it can do a multitude of different things. It's identical to the soft keys. So we can jump from screen to screen. We can force on a relay. We can sound a horn. We can view all of our inputs. We can view our outputs. Anything you can do with the soft keys or the digital input or that scheduling feature we looked at last week, you can do it with the capture feature, except rather than having some sort of human interface, having to push a button, this will perform a meter function based on process conditions. And so that's what I have for you today. Have a good day, everyone.